Beckett, care to tell them what Starfleet's really like?
Hey! What up, everyone? I have an important message for all you lower deckers out there. This guy sucks!
What?
He's an idiot and his plan is stupid. He's gonna get you all killed because he only cares about himself.
Somebody stop her! End that transmission!
Atta girl.
Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here. Welcome to another Lower Decks breakdown video where I bring you a review of the latest episode, as well as the Easter eggs and canon connections that I was able to find. And it's a special one, folks. This is the season finale of Lower Decks Season 4. The episode is called Old Friends, New Planets. So with last week's episode, we got the first to be continued of Lower Decks, and with this episode, we get the first previously on Star Trek Lower Decks, with a recap of the various attacks that have been happening over the course of the season, as well as a few moments that were highlighted that definitely give you a clue as to what's going to be the focus of this episode. Notably, this moment here with the mini Genesis device that the Ferengi were in possession of. So at this point, we know that it's going to have a role in this episode. It's Chekhov's Genesis device, if you will. From there, we get to the episode proper, which starts with a flashback to a young, idealistic Beckett Mariner at Starfleet Academy. Now, this sequence takes place just prior to the events of The First Duty, the 5th season TNG episode where the character of Nick Locarno originated. Here we see his flight group, Nova Squadron, planning to do the Colvard Starburst maneuver. And the most amazing thing about this scene, of course, is the original actors reprising their roles. We, of course, have Robert Duncan McNeil as Nick Locarno, but also joining him is Shannon Phil reprising her role as Cedo Jaxa. Now, this is especially cool because Shannon Phil actually retired from acting. She was active as an actor for a very short period of time, during which she played Cedo Jaxa both in The First Duty and the TNG 7th season episode Lower Decks. So the fact that they were able to bring her back here to reprise this role is extra special, and kudos to the Lower Decks team for being able to do that. And Shannon Phil, thank you so much for reprising this role. That is awesome. Now, it wouldn't be Nova Squadron without Wesley Crusher, and now here is another nice surprise, Will Wheaton reprising his role as Cadet Wesley Crusher. We also get the only member of Nova Squadron we've never met before, Joshua Albert, the cadet who was killed during the Colvard Starburst maneuver attempt. I really appreciated the choice to include him. It gives his death an even greater sense of meaning now that we've actually met the guy in this episode. The final member of Nova Squadron is Cadet Jean Hajar, and we don't hear from her in this episode, but we do see her briefly walking away and waving to the group as she leaves. I also have to comment on the young Mariner in this scene. She is wonderful and very Boimler-esque in her enthusiasm and love of Starfleet here. I think Mariner and Boimler are much more alike than they would either be willing to admit. But that enthusiasm, of course, is juxtaposed by the world weariness that we get of the modern Mariner as the episode goes to the present, where Mariner is confronting Nick Locarno. Now, Locarno thinks that Mariner is on his side, that he's managed to sway this Starfleet officer to his cause. We, of course, know differently, and Mariner is very much not on Nick Locarno's side. It's at this point that I want to talk about this final episode of Season 4 versus what we got at the end of Season 3 of Lower Decks, and how much things have changed. At the end of Season 3, Mariner was kicked off of the Cerritos because the crew and the captain had believed that she had betrayed them and spoken ill of the Cerritos in a news report. We learned that Mariner did not in fact do that and was in fact defending the ship, but at the time she was not listened to and not given the benefit of the doubt. In this season, however, it's very clear right from the start that she is not on the side of Nick Locarno and never will be. At no point in this episode do we actually think that she might join him. And I really appreciate that the episode played it this way and didn't try to do the, oh, will she, won't she kind of thing. Instead, we, along with the crew of the Cerritos and Captain Freeman, absolutely know that Mariner is never going to betray them in this instance. Which now brings us to the Cerritos, where Starfleet has informed Captain Freeman that she is not authorized to go after Mariner, as they don't want to spark a war between the Federation and all of the species that are taking part in this Nova fleet of Nick Locarno's. However, again, in contrast to how the Cerritos and her crew treated Mariner at the end of last season, this season they are willing to defy Starfleet orders and go after Mariner. The captain, of course, gives the speech that she's about to violate a direct order and that the crew is free to follow her or not, and the entire crew elects to join her. It's a lovely tribute to where the character of Mariner has gone, as well as the evolving opinions of her friends and co-workers. Of special note is T'Lyn going along with everything as well, proclaiming Cerritos strong. Meanwhile, back in the Detrion system, Nick Locarno unveils his Nova fleet, which he calls the first non-aligned fleet in the Alpha Quadrant, to which Boimler says the Maquis would like a word. Locarno puts out the call to lower deckers everywhere to engage in mutiny and come join him there in the Detrion system, and as a bargaining chip, he's using the Ferengi Genesis device we saw in Parth Ferengi's Heart Place. Again, Locarno thinks Mariner is completely on his side and gives her the floor, basically, which she uses to denounce Locarno, proclaiming that
This guy sucks!
What?
she exposes him for the person that she believes him to be, a guy who's going to get everybody killed. And while broadcasting out on all channels, she attacks him, steals the Genesis device, and flees the bridge, definitely undermining this guy's credibility. She's able to escape aboard a stolen Federation starship that Locarno has docked there, appointing the Genesis device as her first officer. Now, meanwhile, back on the Cerritos, thanks to Tendi's suggestion, they've traveled to Orion to petition Tendi's sister for the use of an Orion warship. Now, she's reluctant to do so. She can't exactly be seen to be negotiating with Starfleet. But Tendi invokes barter by combat. The deal is that if the Cerritos champion wins, they get an Orion warship, but if the Orions win, Captain Freeman has to turn over control of the Cerritos to D'Erica. The hulking Orion Ba'eth is chosen as champion, and Tendi surprisingly chooses Dr. Miglimo to represent the Cerritos. Now, this combat is hilarious. We learn that Ba'eth is, in fact, allergic to, I guess, chicken feathers or bird feathers, and Tendi urges Dr. Miglimo to fluff his down in the middle of the combat. Now, my one issue with this is, it's an amusing moment, but I feel like Tendi should have given Miglimo a heads up before the combat started. There are a few blows exchanged before she tells him to fluff his down, and I'm sorry, he could have easily just been killed at any moment during that. So a little bit of a risky move there, but it seems to be working out. However, Miglimo gets a little bit too big for his britches, I think, and basically when Ba'eth collapses due to possibly anaphylactic shock from the allergy, she actually falls on top of Miglimo, pinning him, effectively winning the combat for the Orions. Seemingly having no choice, Captain Freeman starts to turn the Cerritos over to D'Erica, but Tendi intervenes, saying that she has something that D'Erica wants more than the Cerritos, Devana Tendi herself. She will return as the mistress of the winter constellations to Orion and serve as such in her sister's criminal organization. Now, D'Erica does seem to keep her word. She turns over the huge Orion warship Retribution to Freeman and her crew. However, they discover that the ship is completely inoperative and in no condition for a fight. This leads to kind of an amusing little sidebar for the episode. We get the return of Livik, who is Rutherford's arch nemesis, I guess, aboard the Cerritos, and they start arguing about how to proceed as far as repairing the ship goes. They seem to be unable to come to a consensus when T'Lyn suggests a way for them to settle their differences. Smash cut to the Riverboat from the Mark Twain program, and we get a return of the Twaining, the two characters who are at odds coming to a consensus via dressing and speaking like Mark Twain. In the words of Captain Freeman,
Why does this work?
A sentiment I agree with. This was kind of my least favorite part of the season in general, and also my least favorite part of this episode. However, I do have to give full credit. It did make me laugh. That smash cut to the riverboat, and you know exactly what's coming. Yeah, what the heck. It made me smile, even though it's just a little too far for me. Now, back in the Detrion system, Mariner is playing cat and mouse with the Ferengi and the Romulans as they try to chase her through this debris field. Eventually, she's kind of forced to enter this ion storm. And from here on, we get this kind of tribute to the Battle of the Mutara Nebula in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, with very similar ship shots and music. And we, of course, also have this ending up with the Genesis device aboard the ship that Mariner has taken, a la Wrath of Khan. Now on the Cerritos, we're surprised to see Boimler in command, and I loved this. I thought he did very well in command of the ship, tractoring the huge Orion ship, basically using it as a battering ram into this Trinar shield that's protecting the entire Detrion system. But where is Captain Freeman, you may ask? Well, her and the command crew are aboard the captain's yacht, following behind the Orion ship, basically taking advantage of the hole that's briefly created in the shield. They manage to get through and rescue Mariner just in time before Locarno shoots her. Now, I loved the scene between Mariner and Locarno where he really reveals who he truly is, this kind of narcissistic person who has had this defeat in his youth eating away at him for years and years, where he continually won't take responsibility on himself. He tries to blame others, ultimately just embracing that he is the bad guy. And even after Mariner is beamed away, she tries to rescue Locarno, saying they have to beam him aboard. However, he has put the shields back up, preventing them from doing so. Meanwhile, he's trying to deactivate the Genesis device before it goes off, and he seems to succeed until the Ferengi-made device asks for a deposit of 2 bars of gold-pressed latinum in order to cancel the explosion, which, as Mariner said earlier in this season, boy, the Ferengi really keep it on brand, don't they? And with that, we get this massive Genesis detonation pulling in the nebula all around and creating a new world. And of course, this is mirroring exactly what happened at the end of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, with the captain's yacht flying away as this explosion spreads out. And interestingly, the Genesis explosion itself looks a lot like Locarno's logo and the Culvered Starburst maneuver that the cadets were going to do in the first duty. Very nice touch there. So it turns out that this new planet is going to be called Locarno, and Starfleet is hoping to use it as a home for refugees, which is interesting that the name Locarno is actually going to have some goodness attached to it now. And we get kind of a wrap up of a lot of what's been going on this season. We get Mariner really confronting what has been making her so angry, and interestingly, throughout this episode, as aggressive as she's been through this season, that talk with the Klingon Ma'a in the last episode and the realization that she came to really helped her out. She never fired a single shot at another person or at another ship throughout this whole debacle. She did fire once on the Trinar shield, but never at another ship or another person. So the way she solved this was through diplomacy and in a very Starfleet and Star Trek manner, which I thought was very cool. We have Rutherford and Livik, who are still enemies. They only get along when they're twaining, apparently. And we get T'Lyn turning down a call from her former Vulcan commander and electing to stay on board the Cerritos as Tendi's science bestie. Unfortunately, that seems like it will have to wait because Tendi is being recalled to Orion because of the deal she made with her sister, which D'Erica is looking to cash in on right away. So we get a very sad goodbye between her and the group, and most notably between Tendi and Rutherford. But as we see Tendi on the Orion ship, she looks to have things well in hand and is greeting this new challenge with, I'd almost say, a note of optimism. Which leads us to the closing credits, different in style from the usual of Lower Decks. Instead of the upbeat Lower Decks theme, we get this warp field and this very dramatic, very fitting music for the events that we've just witnessed. Now, I absolutely loved this episode. I think it's easily the strongest season finale Lower Decks has ever done, and possibly the strongest episode in all of the series. The writing is on point, the characterizations are perfect, and I really like where everyone's come to. And I'm very curious, of course, to see where the story goes next season with Tendi back among the Orions, and how long that will take to play out. So absolute top marks for me. I think they have set an incredibly high bar. Mike McMahon in interviews has said that they took some big swings at the end of this season. And as I've said before, they absolutely knocked it out of the park. Which brings us to the Easter eggs and canon connections in this episode. And there are so many. First of all, in that flashback to Starfleet Academy of 13 years ago, we see a Cation cadet. We also see Boothby, the groundskeeper, who has been mentioned in several episodes, first seen in the episode The First Duty, and subsequently in a couple of Voyager episodes as well. As I mentioned earlier, we have the original Nova Squadron, Nick Locarno, Cito Jaxa, Joshua Albert, and Wesley Crusher, with Will Wheaton, Shannon Phil, and Robert Duncan McNeil reprising their original roles. The young mariner, when she meets up with the group, mentions species that she's learning about, the Preservers, which are from the TOS episode The Paradise Syndrome, and the Xindi from Star Trek Enterprise. Back in the present day, we see in the Nova Fleet station TNG-style worker bees. These are from the TNG Technical Manual. I don't know that we've actually ever seen them anywhere outside of the Tech Manual. We get this wonderful discussion between Boimler and Rutherford on the bridge, where Rutherford, speaking about Nick Locarno, says he looks like Tom Paris. Boimler replies, "I don't see it." Rutherford says, "They have like the same face. They're identical." And Boimler again says, "No, I just don't see it." This was hilarious, and I know in a previous video I said I think it's the funniest thing if Lower Decks just never acknowledges the similarity between the two characters, but I honestly think this was the best thing they could have done. Boimler even has a Tom Paris commemorative plate. Like, he should be very familiar with how Tom Paris looks. He's met the guy, but he still looks at Nick Locarno and says, "No, it doesn't look like him at all." I think that's hilarious. As I said earlier, Boimler mentions the Maquis, the various ships that we see when Locarno is putting out his message. We see an Andorian ship. We see the private ship of Petra Aberdeen. She seems to have picked up some crew members along the way. She was the independent archaeologist that Mariner joined up with towards the end of last season. We see a Hysperian ship. That's the Ren Fair type people that Andy Billups comes from. A Tamarian ship, recreated from what we see in the TNG episode Darmok. When Captain Freeman says she's going to commit a direct violation of their orders, it very much reminded me of Captain Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek First Contact, defying Starfleet orders to engage the Borg. We also see Guji at one point. And I want to talk about the starship that Mariner takes from the Nova Fleet, this Federation starship here. Now, a lot of people online have been noting that it is a Steamrunner class, and I in fact insisted that it was a Steamrunner class in a recent live stream, much to my embarrassment, because there's actually information that it is not a Steamrunner class. It is called a Saber Runner class. And the reason for that is, and the reason for my confusion as well, is that visually it's identical to a Steamrunner class. However, it is scaled down. So according to Brad Winters, who is a co-producer on Lower Decks, the Pasaro is not a Steamrunner class ship, but rather a Saber Runner class ship, which combines Steamrunner aesthetics at a Saber class size. So the Steamrunner class and the Saber class were both introduced in Star Trek First Contact, the Saber class being a much smaller ship. I guess the consensus was that they like this style of ship, but wanted it smaller for the set pieces that we see in this episode. This particular ship is the USS Pasaro, NCC 52670, and the ship was named for the late Fabio Pasaro. He worked with Eagle Moss, creating lots of Star Trek CG models and their associated CAD files that were needed to manufacture the models. He sadly passed away fairly recently, and the ship was named in his honor, and the registry number is also in honor of his birthday, May 26th, 1970. We get a couple of rules of acquisition mentioned in this episode. Rule of acquisition number 91, your boss is only worth what he pays you, and rule 289, shoot first, count profits later. Now in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, it was stated that there were only 285 rules of acquisition. However, it seems that more have been penned since then. As mentioned earlier, we get the return of Livik, music, as well as the Twain hologram, the Level 7 Ion Storm standing in for the Mutara Nebula with the same shots and music that we see in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. We get to see the Cerritos captain's yacht, and Boimler even mentions that he never sees anybody use the captain's yacht, perhaps referring to the fact that the captain's yacht existed throughout all of Star Trek: The Next Generation, yet we never saw it being used. In fact, the first time, and I think possibly the only time until Star Trek Lower Decks that we saw the captain's yacht being used was the Enterprise E's in Star Trek Insurrection. The Genesis explosion being, of course, very similar to the end of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, as I mentioned, and the explosion looking like Locarno's logo and the Culvered starburst. And I also want to call out the Orion ship that comes to pick up Tendi. It's very much a match for the Orion ships that we see in the Star Trek The Animated Series episode, The Pirates of Orion. Well, those were my thoughts and all of the Easter eggs and canon connections that I found in this season finale of Star Trek Lower Decks 4th season. What did you all think of this episode? As I said, I absolutely loved it. I would love to hear what you think. And of course, if I missed any Easter eggs, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much to the Patreon supporters for all of your help. We really do appreciate it. Thank you so very much. To everyone else, the absolute best thing you can do for this channel is to watch the videos. So thank you so very much for doing that. If you haven't already, please subscribe, hit like if you liked this video, and share it around if you know of anybody who might be interested in it. I will see you in the next video. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, as always, live long and prosper.